Hi everyone, welcome to the next Rixxo webinar instalment of 2025. My name is Henry. I lead marketing here at Rixxo. Firstly, I want to thank you all for joining us. We hope you find today's webinar valuable. We've designed this session to provide both actionable and practical advice that will help anyone operating in the B2B space, whether you're a merchant, vendor, or an agency. Today's webinar, B2B Customer Adoption from Site Launch to ROI, is from Rixxo Strategy Lead, Hugh Pembroke. Hugh is going to be taking a look at the strategies to get your customers using your site. Oftentimes, organizations see site launch as the finish line, but what use is a shiny new B2B e-commerce site if your customers aren't using it? Hugh is going to talk from his experience, both brand and agency side, on what successful customer adoption looks like, how you can measure it, how you can optimize it, and lessons that he's learned along the way. Before I hand over, just a few bits of housekeeping. Firstly, please do say hello to each other in the chat and let us know where you're watching from. Just make sure your chat settings are switched to everyone and not panelists and hosts, and that way everyone can see your messages. And if you've got any questions for Hugh, drop them either in the chat or the Q&A feature, and I will get through as many as I can with him at the end. Finally, we will be sending out the recording to everyone that signed up shortly after the webinar ends. So yeah, do keep an eye out in your inbox for when that drops. So yeah, without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Hugh, to kick off.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Henry. So thanks everyone for joining our webinar this afternoon on B2B customer adoption, looking at how we can get B2B e-commerce websites from site launch to demonstrating ROI to our business leaders. So firstly, a little bit about myself, and to introduce myself, I'm Hugh Pembroke. I am the strategy lead here at Rixxo, and I've spent the past 10 years working in B2B e-commerce, both in Australia and the UK on the client and agency side. And before my role as strategy lead at Rixxo, I was the e-commerce and digital lead at Signet, which is one of Australia's largest packaging providers. And during my time there, I led an RFP and digital transformation project where we undertook a significant customer adoption strategy in the first 3 years of the platform, where by the end of it, we were having 70 million in online revenue go through the platform annually. And we migrated 70% of all small medium enterprise invoices into the e-commerce store. These days, I'm working through the same challenges with a lot of our B2B e-commerce clients at Rixxo, and I'm excited to share some of my perspective and insights on customer adoption with you all here today. So to, I suppose, frame customer adoption and what I'll be talking about today, firstly, we'll take a look at what is customer adoption when we take a B2B e-commerce lens to it, and what merchants need to be thinking about when they're thinking about doing customer adoption strategy, and where it sits within your overall sort of digital transformation projects or your e-commerce strategy. We'll take a look at where we've seen customer adoption fail and some tips on how to avoid getting to that site go live without a real plan or idea of, how you want to get your customers to use the platform. We'll take a look at how we can really use data and using a data-driven approach to really focus our effort on customer adoption, and some tactics on customer segmentation to really understand at the end of the day what customers are going to be using the platform in order to hit our business goals and business strategies. I'll try and add as many practical examples and stories from experience around customer adoption, and some really, provide some insight on some good tactics that we've seen work along the way. And then lastly, we'll take a look at, how to demonstrate customer adoption in terms of ROI to business leaders, board members, and really to keep getting that buy-in within your business on your B2B e-commerce journey. And just quickly to introduce Rixxo. So Rixxo is a B2B commerce consultancy. We help wholesalers, manufacturers, and distributors automate, scale, and grow. And we've been doing this since 2012. And I suppose the key one at Rixxo and what we really try and focus on is deeply understanding our clients' business needs, and really trying to be outcome driven and not necessarily just technology or feature driven, and getting a really good understanding, of what those business strategy outcomes need to be, and how we can identify the business needs for us to service in order for us to, deliver those solutions. In addition to that, obviously, once we've identified those business needs and how we need to, drive the e-commerce strategy forward, we help merchants with selecting solutions, ensuring that we are meeting those business needs. And in addition to the consultancy, we also have a production and implementation arm. So we help, merchants implement, activate, and adopt solutions for growth. And then lastly, with the consultancy as well, oftentimes we'll come in and help recover and affirm existing projects by using problem-solving methodologies to get, platform selection or, customer adoption strategies, back on track. So I'll start with what is customer adoption when we think about that in B2B e-commerce, and why customer adoption is really just good fundamental e-commerce strategy. And I think it all comes down to a key question of what customers are actually going to use my platform when they go live and how. And I know that sounds like a basic question, but we'll really dive into this as part of our, investigating our customer adoption strategies. So I have taken, firstly, this definition of what customer adoption is from HubSpot, but essentially customer adoption is the end-to-end process of launching a new product or feature, and in our case today, talking about B2B e-commerce, and driving awareness to that feature and integrating it into the customer's workflow. So I think the core part of this slide, and on the right-hand side, you'll see a customer adoption diagram. And really, it will step you through the 5 phases of adoption, where we start with awareness and interest. And once there's awareness and interest, our customers move into evaluation and testing. And then ultimately, if they have a positive experience, they're going to convert into adoption. And for the first half of the webinar, we're really going to focus on stage 3 and 4 and really drill into how businesses can successfully achieve customer adoption, conversion of when they get evaluation and testing the platform right, and what steps need to be taken to ensure that when we do get to a go live and customers are coming onto the platform, how do we make sure we nail 3 and 4 to ultimately convert into adoption in stage 5. And then also customer adoption needs to be viewed as the final stage in our digital transformation project for B2B e-commerce. So I suppose often with the big sort of e-commerce migrations or project builds, we get to the go live and it almost feels like that's the finish line. But in essence, it really is the start line of now it's the time to get the customers on board and make sure we are seeing that ROI come back through for the investment the company's made in getting into B2B e-commerce. And in many ways, when we think about customer adoption, we need to almost start with customer adoption and look back. So putting the customer at the center of our digital transformation project and say, in order for us to achieve our business strategy goals and our epic statement, we need to sensor check that with how customers are going to use our B2B e-commerce platform and what impact having good customer adoption will have ultimately on us achieving our business strategy and epic statement goals. So epic statement being, a wide-ranging strategic statement talking about where we want to get to from a revenue and growth point of view in a number of years, for instance. And I'll go into epic statements a little bit more, later in the presentation. And then it's also important that we think about customer adoption, at each stage and build alignment as part of our digital transformation project. So really the way, we need to be thinking about it is if we start at customer adoption and look back, what customers and how they're going to use our platform is really going to impact, what makes the B2B e-commerce project in terms of MVP requirements and the initial build. Based on what makes the MVP requirements and initial build, that'll have a big impact on what platform we select to ultimately achieve our business goals. That'll also impact what business needs that we need addressed or pain points that exist in the business currently that we're looking to solve by B2B e-commerce. And ultimately, if we achieve our customer adoption goal and thinking about our customer adoption goal at the very start of the project, it'll be really aligned with where the business needs to get to and ultimately get more buy-in from the business because it's contributing to the overall success of the business strategy. And if we don't have alignment, it's really hard to achieve customer adoption. And what I'll sort of go through now is where B2B e-commerce adoption often fails, and from what we've seen. So firstly, when we think about a lack of strategic alignment between both business and digital goals. So what we really mean here is there's a lack of alignment between the business strategy and the customer adoption plan, which really can mean that we might lose focus or get distracted in terms of what features and functionality we really need to be bringing through as part of the project, as part of the initial build. If we get that wrong, then we think about with platform selection. If we're not thinking about the right features and functionality that we need as part of the initial build, it could lead to a potential, platform selection that doesn't yield the right outcome for the business. And we might have features and functions that aren't actually fit for purpose for onboarding the customers that we need to be using that platform. My next point also is around aiming for 100%. So I think in B2B, businesses, there's a number of different ways that, businesses transact. And then there's a heap of different sort of go-to-market strategies for different businesses. And it's really important that we take a customer segmented approach when looking at B2B e-commerce and understanding, where the nuance, where the pain points are going to be for each different customer set that our businesses serves. And if you are, I suppose, getting into B2B e-commerce for the first time, it's really important to look at what good customer adoption looks like from a point of customer segmentation, as in, is there a buying group within your existing customer database that is going to be more suited towards B2B e-commerce in its first instance? And are there buying groups that have more customization required or more complex requirements in order to deliver a B2B e-commerce experience? And really targeting and highlighting, I suppose, that low-hanging fruit customer segment to bring them onto your B2B e-commerce platform first, before you start extending the functionality too far, because once we extend functionality comes cost, budgets, and timelines. And then lastly, we talk about a lack of investment in platform post-launch. So I think one of the key things here is, there needs to be planning and budget planning for what that budget needs to look like post go live, particularly on, or it needs to be aligned with, what level of adoption you're going to go for. But the key thing here is really talking about until your customers have really placed hundreds and thousands of orders through, the B2B e-commerce platform, it's going to be really tough to capture all the use cases and different bits of functionality for each customer to place an order online. So it's important that there's enough budget left over post go live in order to sort of have that roadmap and have that iteration experience to make sure we're ironing out any of those pain points for those customers once we have gone live, and that your platform will continue to evolve and the way you'll do business will continue to evolve. So you will need to at least budget or factor in that there is going to be a level of investment required post launch, and that's often where we see merchants really start to drop off from an e-commerce perspective. So my second point, around customer adoption and one of the key messages that I'd like to get across today is talking about laying your customer adoption plans and laying the foundations for your project. And the point we want to make here is that customer adoption is really best thought about at the start of your project and not about when we're getting to the go live. And the best way to develop a sound customer adoption strategy is really to build that alignment throughout the project in order for you to capture the correct business needs, the correct requirements that you're going to need on day one in order to amplify and get that evaluation and testing correct for your customers to ultimately adopt your platform. And one of the reasons, and the main reason for this, is your foundational work for your digital transformation project will define your customer adoption strategy. And what we mean here is that what we set out to achieve with the foundational work actually is purely just being activated by your customer adoption plan. So we really need to assure that the customer adoption plan is aligned with either a business strategy document, or in our case, we use an epic statement when we're running our foundations process, or and then we need to look at a list or a document of business needs and pain points, essentially that the e-commerce platform needs to solve in order to get these customers online. And some key business needs is around thinking about, say, password migration is always a massive one. And if you're moving from platform to platform, thinking about how we get customers to reset their passwords in a sort of seamless fashion, and what risk mitigation strategies do we need to put in place, or is there any extra bits of features and functionality that we can add to the initial business needs scope in order to make that process as efficient and effective as possible. And then lastly, getting a list of requirements and that meet your business needs that ultimately will deliver that MVP, and really thinking about that MVP and what customers do I need using the MVP, and how we use data to inform what customers are going to give the biggest efficiency impact to the business, or the biggest net gain in revenue by getting them onto the B2B e-commerce platform. And then the second one is why we need to think about customer adoption at the very start and not at the end, is really thinking about how are you planning for your customers to use it, and what is your customer adoption strategy. So if you know how your customers are going to use it, then essentially you've designed a lot of the scope by answering that simple question. So when we think about an epic statement and talking about achieving revenue growth, there's two ways that we can sort of do that. We can build efficiency within B2B e-commerce that allows us to reallocate resource within our business to other areas, or we can save resource by making our business processes more efficient, which can be reallocated into sales driving activities, or we can use the B2B e-commerce system as a sales driving platform itself. And the two different ways is normally channel migration, where channel migration is existing customers and moving their order sources from offline, so phone, email, and other methods, onto the B2B e-commerce platform, or customer acquisition, where customer acquisition focuses on attracting new buyers through digital and offline marketing to drive onto the website, to drive traffic and help us generate and convert into sales and leads. And understanding how you plan to use B2B e-commerce to align with your business strategy is super important here, and ultimately how you're going to achieve your epic statement. So is it going to be through adding B2B e-commerce to increase business efficiency, allowing you to free up resources to spend more time on sales driving activity? Or are you going to use B2B e-commerce to essentially convert and drive more sales and revenue itself? Because that will then dictate how you demonstrate ROI and how you plan your customer adoption strategy as well. And my next point around customer adoption is really thinking about why you need to be doing it at the start. Is change management is really hard as it is, but it's really hard to do on the fly. And the more we can, I suppose, get people along for the journey and start to plan from a people, process, and platform point of view, the better. Because often with e-commerce launches and getting bits of functionality and technology into businesses, we often talk about it that it's more of a change management project than a technology project. So the better we can sort of plan, adapt, and brief people on what the changes are going to be, the better that we're going to break down those internal barriers to internal customer adoption, which is really as big as getting the external customers online. So when we think about this a little bit further, so the migration of, say, all these offline orders, say if we're pursuing a channel migration strategy onto the B2B e-commerce platform, is going to have a wide-ranging impact on the business. When we think about customer service teams, we think about sales, we think about marketing, and we need to also be thinking about the customer adoption strategy through this lens on what requirements and business needs do we need to capture as part of this that is going to impact the people, process, and platform. So for instance, thinking, back to some of the launches we've done, is when you are, making a change to the customer service team, there needs to be wide scaling training. They've got to be really comfortable with the platform. they might actually see an increase in inquiries, in the 2 weeks post-launch with people looking to reset passwords and those sorts of things. But then over time, we might see the actual resource required for customer service come away as we sort of get more efficiency and more customers ordering through the website. Then the second, thinking about your processes, are we planning on changing any customer-facing processes, and what do we need to do from a comm strategy point of view to manage these processes? So again, using password migration as a example, like what are the friction points going to be for customers? Is there multiple buyers, associated to a company that might need to do reset passwords? How do we make sure that we set up our biggest customers online and making sure that they're, have access to the platform and there's no issues from a password point of view? How do we make sure our customer service team can see what emails are being sent out to customers in regards to password resets so that they know that the email is actually going to the right user? The next example would be around, how do we use integration to make sure that we're reducing the impact on, people, platform, and process throughout this change management phase of the project. And I think a good example for this one was around, using integration in my time at Signet. So we moved from, a custom bespoke e-commerce platform onto Adobe Commerce, and we had most of our customer service team, accounts teams, using Microsoft Dynamics to, key and automate key and sort of process sales orders, sorry. And, one of the key concerns was if, for whatever reason, there was an issue with an order or we needed to check, item information or what was placed at point of sale, being the e-commerce website, and how do we make sure they have the relevant information for them to log into the platform and see the right order. And one of the key concerns was that there was a different order ID in Magento compared to the sales order number within Dynamics 365 that then was converted into invoicing. So using integration, we sort of captured that and identified that, as part of that, we're going to have to map the Magento order ID to each entity record within the ERP. So at each phase of, the order lifecycle within the ERP platform, a user could go and see the corresponding order within Adobe Commerce without having to contact the e-commerce team or, do further investigation. And it was only a little thing that we captured as part of, thinking about what customers we need online. But, it saved us a lot of time post-go launch, and was definitely, a great example of how thinking about this early allows to make that change management just a little bit easier when you are going live. So the next point is really around, so what can you do about it? And I suppose there's normally three stages that, merchants might be in. So there's starting your B2B e-commerce journey. You might be in the middle of a build, or you might have already launched, but you're not yet seeing the adoption that you would like. And for me, I think the important thing is to take a minute now, or, a time of reflection, and go ask yourself these three clear questions. So, do I have an epic statement or business strategy document that tells me what B2B e-commerce needs to do? And has it been agreed by our leadership or board in relation to achieving, business strategy or business goals? Have I documented all my business needs and pain points of getting customers online? And do I have a list of these where I've aligned them to my features and functionality required? And then lastly, do I know exactly what customers I want as my core customers to be using our B2B e-commerce platform? And what customers can we service on this version of the B2B e-commerce platform? And most importantly, what customers can't we currently service on the B2B e-commerce platform due to features and functionality that we can't provide? Cool. So the next part I want to focus on is how we can focus our efforts when it comes to customer adoption strategy by using a data-driven approach to identify key buying groups that might be, best suited to our B2B e-commerce. And I think the key thing for me is really looking at where we focus our effort. And for this one, I'm going to use a practical example. And this was something that we spent a lot of time doing at Signet, where we looked at customer segmentation via spend band. And the segmentation, I'm not going to give a talk on segmentation today because I only have about 50 minutes, but essentially a lot of the spend band analysis we used to do was based almost like a frequent flyer type scheme with, a lot of the airlines where you'd have a, platinum, gold, silver, bronze, yellow or red, which essentially segmented our customers into, average spend bands of what they would spend annually with us. And we would essentially look to, associate our activity to them based on how much money that they're spending with the business, and sort of making sure that we're aligning, the effort we're putting into each one of those customers with the outcome that we saw. So if we're to take, a very, more basic version of that customer segmentation concept, and we look at, say, let's have a business of 40 million pounds in annual revenue with an active customer database of, 20,000 customers. And what a really good starting point to do with your customer database in terms of working out the segmentation is taking a look at a concept, everyone's probably familiar with it, but the 80-20 rule, or the Pareto principle, which essentially says that, in B2B, it's actually more a manufacturing term, but, that 20% of your effort will lead to 80% of your outcomes. And, when we think about that from a B2B point of view, that, our top 20% of our customers often lead to about 80%, of our overall sales, and vice versa, where, 80% of our effort or 80% of our customer database leads to 20% of our sales or outcomes in this sense. And what we're trying to, do by this is working out where our effort is disproportionate to the level of sales or outcomes that we're getting. So simply by just applying that to this simple example, we developed two very distinct buying groups that we already have within the business. So we have our high value customers, which are the top 20%, which make up 32 million pounds in revenue and equate to 4,000 customers. So when you just think about that, automatically, you're thinking our high value customers, we probably have, account management and sales reps assigned to a lot of these customers. These customers might have contracted pricing, they might have contracted items, they probably have more complex company and customer account setups where they might have, a decision-making hierarchy with a lot of their orders. And conversely, then we have our long tail SMB or small medium business customers, where they make up, 80% of our customer count at 16,000 customers and return 8 million in revenue. And often these will be our customers that are, more based on our standard catalog. They have catalog pricing. They buy from our standard product range. They probably order less frequently with us. And they probably have pretty simple, company and customer accounts. And obviously I'm making generalizations there, but by doing that exercise, we pretty quickly see that there's two different, buying groups within the business. And where are we going to get the value of, focusing our B2B e-commerce in terms of adoption, and how can we build, that efficiency into the business? And then I suppose the next thing that we did as this example was then really breaking down, and you can go into however many layers you want to do, but breaking out your two different customer segments and then looking at order source and how you're currently servicing those customers. And again, what we're trying to look for is where there's, disproportionate resource spent for the outcome that we're getting. So the key thing I want to sort of, communicate as part of this slide is that there's 32,000 invoices being posted yearly for our high value customers, and there's 48,000 invoices being posted yearly for our small medium businesses. And when we think about, keying or processing an invoice, doesn't matter where it's 10 grand or, £1,000, there's not too much difference in terms of the amount of resource it takes to process that invoice. I understand every business, is different, but speaking in general terms, an invoice roughly takes about the same amount of time. And so what really highlights there is then when we look at our SMB, breakdown between email, phone, and e-commerce, we can see that currently there's 25,000 orders being placed each year by email, where they're emailing in their SKUs and when they want to buy. And it's a really sort of low value interaction in terms of a lot of manual processing, quite labor intensive from a customer service resource point of view. And we're not necessarily giving them that customer experience where they're experiencing the brand, our other catalogs, how we can cross-sell, and all those things. So I think understanding where there's potentially inefficiencies in the business and breaking down your buying groups accordingly to really understand where to focus your B2B e-commerce. So once we've done that exercise, it's pretty clear that the target for our at least our first phase of our B2B e-commerce needs to be really focused on our SMB customers. And I've got the slide saying the target has been acquired, but our SMB customers, which are our bottom 80%, which spend roughly £500 per year with us, and they probably have an order frequency of 3 or 4 times a year. This makes up 16,000 customers. So again, within this buying group, there's probably multiple different buying groups as well, but for the purpose of this exercise, we'll keep it just to the 2. And the key thing or the key detail is there's 25,000 invoices that are manually processed by the customer service team that come in via email. And I think by doing this exercise, you can then even get more specific and more clearer on what business needs we need to include within the MVP and initial build in order to minimize the friction points for these customers and ensure that when they're testing and evaluating the platform post go live, that they have all the business needs being met by the e-commerce experience that we're delivering. Along with this, I know our marketers will appreciate the customer segmentation and handing a clear sort of marketing and communication strategy brief of what we need to do, but more importantly, what customers and what the messaging needs to be. And it's important to sort of understand that and then build the relevant launch campaigns and launch strategies around that, and briefing the different stakeholders and team members on what the messaging to these customers needs to be. And then lastly, where it really clears it up is like the clear KPIs and targets that it provides for B2B e-commerce. So instead of simply viewing revenue increases and those sorts of things, we're starting to really look at, okay, how are we building business efficiency and how are we migrating those customers across onto the B2B e-commerce? And we can develop KPIs and targets that are more geared towards business efficiency rather than purely how much did we spend on the platform and how much revenue are we seeing, that incremental gain by changing platform, for instance. So to sum up, I suppose the key takeouts of how we, really focus our attention when it comes to customer adoption strategy. I think the first one is, to segment your data, and I know that's a broad-ranging statement, but many businesses will have different, customer segmentation. But I think really understanding, drilling into your customer segments, and understanding, where there is a disproportionate amount of effort to the amount of, outcome you're getting as a way of looking at how to build efficiency via your B2B e-commerce platform, I think is a great spot to start. Once you've done that, really analyze those different opportunities in terms of using the Rixxo impact framework that we have there from a people, process, and platform point of view, as in what's going to be required to get those customers online, from a process, from a people, from a platform point of view, and how can we use integration to bring that all together. And then lastly, really aligning that customer adoption strategy and thinking about how that might change the business needs that you need as part of your project, or the requirements required in that MVP and initial build of the platform. So next, now that we've got the foundational work laid, we've identified our target segment. I think it's important to really establish and get those targets set, before we set off in terms of what we're working towards. And this will give you a really consistent way of demonstrating progress towards, achieving the goal of the B2B e-commerce, and really help you anchor the conversation when discussing the progress of B2B e-commerce with business leaders and leadership teams on achieving this outcome. And you can then, I suppose, focus your decision making on, how we actually achieve this outcome. And the example from the, practical example I shared before is really around setting, a smart objective for what your customer adoption strategy and plan needs to achieve. And I think the key one here is, so the example here is to increase the SMB website invoices to 35,000 invoices per year by migrating 15,000 of these to the e-commerce channel by the end of year one. So really looking at redistributing our order source and moving those email orders into our e-commerce channel. One, as discussed before, to build that efficiency into the business, but then showing the metric in the way that you're going to track progress, throughout the year and throughout that customer adoption plan. So the metric that we used was, web percentage of invoice. So speaking about in our target segment, what is the percentage of what is the percentage of web orders when looking at the proportion of all orders? So, for instance, the current rate, there is 41% of all invoices for our SMB customers that are going through the website. We want to get that up to 73% in order, for us to meet our SMART goal and KPI for the first 12 months of our B2B e-commerce platform. And I think another important point is really aligning your goals and your metric back to the message that you're trying to give to the business. And, the thing I've been talking about throughout this presentation is around how we build efficiency and channel migration and using the right metric to show that. So when we think about, the web percentage of invoice, we're sort of talking about invoice being a level of effort. And if we were to do sales or revenue, it's actually an inaccurate way of demonstrating that. So with revenue, obviously one customer migrated across could be worth, £10,000 per year. Another customer could be worth £1,000. So there's not that normalization of, 1:1. And I think with using something like invoice, it really shows the efficiency or communicates that efficiency measurement. And it's important that we, really think about that and align that metric and goal to the message that we're trying to get through to our business leaders and board. By setting a smart objective as well, it'll really start to help us identify, what are the main barriers going to be for customer adoption, and what is the feature set required, and what are the key friction points for when we do go live. And when we talk about, customer facing, barriers that often lead to, poor adoption or a poor first experience where we then have to try 3 times harder to get that customer back using the website. The key ones for us that we see are around product data and pricing not being up to date for that certain set of customers. And that really comes back to, what customers we are trying to drive online and, what features are achievable as part of our MVP in terms of making sure that, might just be catalog facing customers that we are able to provide B2B e-commerce to in the first instance. Then something like, customers are buying custom options or ranges that we don't necessarily merchandise on the site. So again, this sort of information needs to feed into your smart objectives and making sure, that what you are setting is actually achievable as well. So factoring in these different barriers to adoption for that customer set is really important. And there's obviously, all these types of data is within your master data set. So, number of customers that are purchasing, items that aren't in your catalog range should be things that you're able to calculate and then factor into your smart objectives as you are moving into your customer adoption plan. And then the next two are more, thinking about what needs to be, there on day one for your customers in terms of how do I make sure that all the web accounts have been created and what integration or master data uploads do I need to do to make sure that when they log into my account on day one, they've got orders, invoices, or, favorite items, all those sorts of things, and understand, is that how your customers that you're targeting to use the website, is that how they use the website, or am I going to ask them to create a new account at time of sign off? Because all these things are friction, they are barriers, and they will have an impact on your smart objective. And lastly, I've touched on it a few times, but password reset process again is always one that pops up with clients. The second part I want to talk about when we think about how to use a smart objective to get alignment is really thinking about your people. And I suppose with any digital transformation, we've spoken about it a few times, that it is as much a change management project as it is a digital transformation, and using your smart objective to really build alignment through your team is really important. So firstly, having the reporting dashboards to track progress. So having that data available to the team around web percentage of invoice and metrics that are really informing behavior. Tracking order source in master data, I think, is really important. So wherever you process your orders, or whatever ERP you're using, or however the picks turn from warehouse documents into invoices, making sure that we're able to track where the order came from, in terms of at least email, phone, e-commerce, however else orders get into the system, is super important for us to understand channel migration and how customers are interacting with the business, and what progress we're making in terms of getting orders into the e-commerce platform. Another key one that gets spoken about a lot when we think about internal customer adoption and B2B e-commerce is around salespeople, and the friction that sometimes B2B e-commerce can give to salespeople. And the only time we really do see that is when salespeople are targeted in competition with B2B e-commerce. And it's really important to set up your reporting structure and your data architecture so that salespeople aren't competing with your e-commerce, and e-commerce is simply seen as an ordering channel and not as a salesperson, so to speak, so that regardless of where salespeople's customers are placing orders, they're only tasked with account growth, and where those orders are actually coming through is irrelevant from a tracking and towards their bonus structures and those sorts of things. And then lastly, looking at the different KPIs within your team in order to set the behavior, to drive behavior. And a key example of this at Signet was we had, once we went live, we're looking at some of the customer adoption, and we we're seeing password resets not be at the level that we wanted to, in terms of how many users had logged in 30 days post go live. And a really good example of looking at the KPIs to drive behavior was looking at our live chat queue times and how long we were taking to get back to users when they were on the site. And I think that was one of the key sort of things that we had to rectify, was really bring that queue time down and make sure our issue resolution was had the best KPIs and the best metrics on live chat. Because once the users are on the site, they're ready to log in, they're ready to go live. If they need to then submit an inquiry, or give us a ring, or they abandon their chat, it's going to take us again 3 times as many attempts to get them back online. So really looking at what are the different KPIs within the teams within the business that will really ensure that we have good adoption. And by simply just lowering that queue time, we had more closed chats and we had more successful password resets online, which saved us a mountain of work to then try and win those customers back to get them online and using the e-commerce store. So once we've done our foundational work, we've identified what customer segment we're going after from a B2B e-commerce point of view, and we've worked out what our objectives are. It's really time to now look at that awareness and building that interest with our customers, and the foundations are now set. So it's onto us to really look at launching the website and starting to deliver that customer adoption plan. And I suppose some key things that we've seen as part of customer adoption plan, we would love to go through one end to end, but in terms of the key themes that we see in successful ones, I'll go through those now. So if we talk about communicating early and often to your internal stakeholders, so the biggest barriers we did discuss in the last couple of slides is those internal stakeholders. So we really need to start with internal adoption during the build, and that means good stakeholder management throughout that build and designing of the platform process. So making sure that we've sought requirements and business needs from the different departments within the business, and then as well as that, spending time doing demonstration to stakeholders. So there's always friction when people don't necessarily understand how something works. So it's important taking the time, going around to the different accounts, customer service, procurement, marketing, IT teams, and giving them a really thorough demonstration of how the B2B e-commerce platform works and what customers can expect from a user interface point of view, so that everyone understands what customers can expect and are able to answer questions, if a customer was to ask. Third point, I'd really look at, building an internal comm strategy and launch plan. So as much as, getting that, marketing plan correct, it's important to get that internal marketing plan correct and be sending out, launch emails to your, internal customers, as well as, building collateral, training guides, videos. If you have a learning and development team, potentially getting them to put together some, website modules, for instance, on how to use it as a customer. The other one would be around, showing them through the staging sites and giving them access to the staging sites before you do go live, so they can be really comfortable in looking at that. And how you can keep yourself accountable to doing all those activities, because they're the first ones that slip off, when things get busy, is building that, internal comms and strategy plan and sort of feed that through the team as, what needs to be activated internally. And then lastly, use your digital ambassadors and super users within the business. So we spoke about this last time about really trying to leverage these people within your business to, help train, help educate, others within your business on how the platform is used. And then what we need to, some key things that we need to include in terms of building awareness. So, we're into phase 1 and 2 of the model now, because we're confident that 3 and 4 will lead to the conversion of adoption in 5. And some key tips is really look at your email marketing campaigns and building those email marketing campaigns based on action-based data that you're collecting with a lot of your e-commerce platforms. So for instance, we've seen some really good examples of how clients and customers have built email marketing flows based on login date. So a lot of our e-commerce platforms will capture the last time a customer has logged in, and obviously it will be blank if a customer's never logged in. You can look at synchronizing those data fields into your Klaviyo or .digital or whatever email marketing platform you're using, and building those email marketing flows based on whether a user's logged in before, and dynamically changing content based on if they are a web user or not, or whether they've have or haven't logged into the site. And you can really cascade that consistent e-commerce sign up for e-commerce messaging throughout all your sales and marketing emails, and also create tailored communication to try and convert those customers into logging in and placing orders through your website. I'd also create collateral for launch, training guides, videos. There's lots of good tools out there nowadays to create a lot of that information for your customers, and really take the time to provide them with all the information required in order to place orders and create accounts. Another great example or tactic that we've seen done is called a website concierge campaign. And what that was, where we essentially built a number of different landing pages, and we drove customers there via email marketing comms, and essentially had a form there where they could leave their details and a time for a callback, where one of our customer service team would call them up and essentially take them through in a 5 to 10 minute demo of the e-commerce platform, and set them up with relevant passwords and access to their my account area, and would quickly talk them through about how to place an order. And it was amazing, the uptake one that the concierge program had, but also the impact. It really helped building relationships with those customers in terms of customer retention, but also just taking that 5-10 minutes to get that one customer set up with their e-commerce account really helped in the long run. Because when we think about that customer coming back and placing 10 orders over the calendar year, that's all automated from now on. So that 10-minute conversation from a customer service agent really paid off in dividends, and really allowed us to convert more and more users, through to the e-commerce site. And then lastly, in your creative, make sure you're communicating the win-win. So communicate all the different features that you've put, blood, sweat, and tears in the e-commerce, project element of the project, sorry, in that creative, and make sure, you're really celebrating all the, features and functionality that you have put into the site and how it's going to make that customer experience better for those users. And then lastly, when it comes to customer adoption plans, is use your data to really, plot your next move and have some solid sort of metrics in place, both on a quantitative and qualitative point of view, to really inform, where you need to go next in your customer adoption plan. And, the two metrics I encourage everyone to be tracking as part of their customer adoption plan is firstly, the number of customers in your target customer segment that have logged in or activated their account, and almost use this as your lead metric. So, if 75% of customers have logged in, then how many of them have gone on to place an order? And what's the difference between, people that have logged in and placed an order? And are there any reasons as to why a customer has logged in, set up an account, and not ordered? It might just be that they're not ready to, but really, digging into that and understanding the numbers as to how many customers have had troubles logging in. Another great thing with a lot of the email marketing platforms and using transactional emails through, the e-commerce platforms, is you can see all the emails that are going out of the system. So, do some analysis on, is there any customers that have been sent, 5 reset password emails and haven't been sent password success email? And sort of create lists, I suppose, for your customer service teams, or to proactively reach out to those customers and go, are you having any problems with resetting your password? And try and capture, those customers before they sort of fall out of the funnel, or give up on using the website, and use the data that's in those platforms to really inform and drive your team to sort of get these customers online. The next one is around, the lag metric, or the, web percentage of invoice, sort of comes from having good sign-ins. So we've already been over that one. But then in terms of some qualitative data sources that, most e-commerce sites will have and can be really, interesting sort of to have, is live chat transcripts. So particularly around, go live in the first couple of months post go live, is, use the transcripts and, search for different keywords like password reset, new website, and try and get some qualitative information, about, where customers might be struggling, where the pain points are between the different processes. And, most of the platforms will allow you to sort of export those into, a Google Sheet, for instance, and really try and, analyze that data on bulk and see how many of the different issues are coming through, and try and understand, where the issues might be coming from, and then go back to your, your framework of people, platform, and process to try and, work out where the best solution might lie. And then the last example is around, having an internal feedback mechanism. And I suppose, anyone who's launched an e-commerce website sort of knows the first month is not fun. But in terms of that, try and get to as many huddles and team meets as possible where you can be, answering questions and taking feedback on the site. But also create a method for internal teams to leave feedback. So, what we did at Signet, instead of our, the e-commerce team's inbox getting absolutely flooded with, different bits of feedback from the site, is we created a Trello board, just a simple Kanban that sort of worked as, a roadmap. You see it with a lot of the tech platforms, where essentially you have like ticket raised, ticket in progress, ticket done. And we essentially used like an upvote plugin on the Trello card, where we allowed users to upvote. So if there was something that already had been raised, we just asked them to upvote the issue, which would then dictate the priority, and it gets handled. It also helps with then seeing those internal customers being able to see that Trello ticket move through the different phases and ultimately get put in to done. And it really helps with that, that internal customer adoption and working through, the issues as they come through post go live. So my last point today in talking about customer adoption is, how can we effectively demonstrate ROI? And I think the key, thing with this is there's no magic formula to demonstrating ROI, particularly for B2B e-commerce and B2B businesses, because there's so much nuance to how the business operates and how B2B e-commerce can impact a business. And I think in most cases, it's really difficult to do this, and particularly when we talk about, how much was spent on a platform and what the incremental, I suppose, return is on that. But I think the most important thing, and why, setting up that foundational work is so important, is so that we can show progress towards achieving, that business strategy, and build a clear understanding of what B2B e-commerce needs to do for the business. And then that will allow you to demonstrate the ROI through delivering against the stated KPIs that have been agreed to. And also it's helped demonstrate where there's, revenue increase, but also where there's been really good efficiency increase. And then this breaks, I know this is breaking every presentation PowerPoint rule of all time, but essentially what I wanted to show here was a fully formed epic statement, and why the epic statement is so important, as we move through the adoption plan, and how we can sort of, correlate outcomes back to our epic statement. So I'll just quickly read this out. But, the epic statement as an example for the practical example I've been going through is, over the next 2 years, we will drive a sustainable and scalable growth for the business, increasing revenue from 40 to 50 million by optimizing operations, enhancing sales and account management, and expanding our product range to elevate the customer experience. And the 4 key pillars of how we're going to do that is through operational efficiency and cost optimization. So automate invoicing to reduce the manual workload, which will free up sales team resources. We want to focus on sales and account management excellence, so shifting the customer service team focus to proactive sales and customer success. We want to drive product range expansion and new revenue streams, leveraging cross-selling to boost the average order value. And then lastly, we want to look at customer experience and service excellence to improve issue resolution and speed to enhance customer satisfaction by retention. And so lastly, by executing these strategic initiatives, we will create a more efficient, customer-centric and profitable business. And why that epic statement is important is because it gives us a framework to then analyze the progress of the B2B e-commerce and align, the information that we're providing back to the business on how we're progressing to achieve those different targets. So in this example, for instance, when we talk about operational efficiency and cost optimization, so we're now processing 20,000 fewer manual invoices, which has freed up, the customer service team resource. When we think about sales and account management excellence, the customer service team has now had a shift in focus, and they're able to spend 20% of their time on sales and customer success driving activity, which ultimately leads to an increase in sales. When we talk about product range expansion, with B2B e-commerce, those customers that were placing orders via email, where they were sending it to an inbox, are now going to our e-commerce website. They're looking at our full product catalog. They're getting served cross-sells as they're viewing product pages. It's very likely that we're going to see an uplift in average order value. And then lastly, when we think about customer service excellence, because the number of resources required in terms of keying those manual orders has now been reduced, we should, in theory, have faster resolution times in terms of answering phones, answering live chats, getting back to email inquiries, with also helps with improved customer satisfaction and retention. So before I go pass out, because I've just been speaking for the last 50 minutes, I'll quickly recap. So in terms of when we think about customer adoption, it needs to be seen as just another step as part of the program, and it really is best thought about at the start. Not saying that that's an absolute statement, but we do need to set that foundational work before we think about our customer adoption strategy. I think for merchants, try and be as data driven as possible. So using this data to inform your decision making when it comes to what segments you need to get online and what the goals and targets are of your e-commerce strategy. Communication, with any sort of change management or technology project, really getting a good understanding of what the barriers are going to be for your internal and external customers, and making sure that we have a comm strategy to build understanding around how we're going to get those customers online, and what the benefits are of the platform. And then lastly, in demonstrating ROI, is really use your epic statement not only as a project charter and a way to guide your decision making, but also on how you show progress for the B2B e-commerce, and make sure it's really aligned, to what you're doing from a metric, goal, and KPI point of view. And lastly, thank you. So thanks for your time today as part of the webinar. And I suppose whether you're a merchant, platform, or agency, we'd love to chat. We love talking B2B e-commerce here at Rixxo. So whether it's myself, it's Chris, or any of the team at Rixxo, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, and we can book a call in to talk about anything when it comes to B2B e-commerce, but also what we discussed today when it comes to customer adoption. And with that, I will have a drink of water and hand back over to Henry.
Cheers, Hugh. Yeah, so much useful information in there. Like, I'm sure there's so many businesses that just set that unrealistic expectation of 100% adoption and end up having to rethink that. We probably only have time, we're 1 minute over, so we just have time for one question. If you've submitted a question and it's not this one that gets asked, then please reach out to Hugh on LinkedIn or via email, and I'm sure you'd be more than happy to answer those, Hugh. Um, um, so yeah, we've got a question here. So kind of you speak on planning being essential, but kind of what advice would you give to those that are kind of currently experiencing customer adoption challenges, kind of who have already launched, and kind of haven't done that planning phase?
Yeah, I think it still applies, as in, go back to those foundational steps and really start to understand what the business strategy or that epic statement needs to be for your B2B e-commerce, and then map your current B2B e-commerce, I suppose, process flow, and where the current pain points are for what you're trying to achieve. And then I think the last thing would be around, not trying to solve the problems from a people, process, and platform point of view, is in not always going or thinking that it just needs to be, a technology fix. Is there a temporary solution where we can, put more people on there, or potentially change something, in our process to make sure that we're getting those customers online? But yeah, the main thing for me would be making sure that whether you've just launched a website, would be to come thinking about your foundational steps and having those in place before you sort of push on any further with the customer adoption strategy. And I think the second part of that would be looking at customer segmentation and understanding where the easiest customers are, or the low-hanging fruit within your customer database, and really focusing your effort on going after them first. Particularly if you're not seeing, great adoption for, say, your more enterprise customers, or, and focusing on that customer segmentation approach.
Awesome. Thanks, Hugh. Yeah, brilliant, super useful. That unfortunately is all we have time for today. Apologies if you didn't get your question answered, but as I said, please reach out to Hugh either over email or LinkedIn. Thank you for joining us. We'll be sending out the recording shortly, so just keep an eye on your inbox when that drops. We'll also have details of our next webinar available soon. So yeah, drop us a follow on LinkedIn to be the first to know. See you next time. Thank you.